Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science. My name is Nick Pallavita. I'll be your moderator for today's program, and with Dr. Patmos, Michael Patmos. And what we're going to be discussing today is something that's very important for all of our listeners. It deals with the measles, the outbreak, and unfortunately, more measles reported in the United States of America right now this year, and we're into March, than have all of last year. And then what I find really disturbing, that really bothers me as an attorney, is that to access the information, CBS had to pull an FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act, to get the information from the great state of Florida, which I practice law in, by the way. And it was kind of funny because Florida's supposed to have government in the sunshine. But apparently, under the new administration, it's government in the darkness, because otherwise you wouldn't have to pull an FOIA. And with that, we're going to bring in somebody who's going to hopefully enlighten us about this pandemic, board certified in internal medicine, a medical doctor himself, Dr. Michael Patmos. So Dr. Michael Patmos, I don't know what's going on here when you have to pull an FOIA to get information from the great state of Florida. Why are they not being transparent when it comes to the measles outbreak? Talk to me.
Well, Nick, this is a very explosive story, really scandalous, and it hasn't caught on. The media hasn't picked up on this yet, and perhaps as a result of this podcast, they will. There's a very significant story here that needs to be told that hasn't quite been recognized. What we're talking about. So let me just bring everybody up to speed. In early to mid-February, an outbreak of measles was detected in Broward County, Florida, at an elementary school. I think it was initially about 7 children, and then it went up to about 10. And that was pretty alarming because, measles was gone from the United States. It was declared eradicated in 1999, and we didn't see any cases of measles until just the last couple of years. It's coming back. It's coming back because of fall off in vaccination rates. So this outbreak in Florida was pretty big, 10 cases. That's quite a few, because there's a lot of unimmunized children in Florida, about 400,000 or so. So there's a lot of kids out there who could get measles. And measles is very contagious. One infected person will on average affect about 12 to 18 others. So it can really spread logarithmically. So anyhow, around mid-February or so, this outbreak was reported and detected, and it made big news. What even made bigger news was a couple days later, the Surgeon General for the state of Florida issued a very shockingly peculiar recommendation. And he said to the parents of children in that school district, if your child is not vaccinated and they were exposed to measles, it's okay. You can send them to school. We'll leave it up to you. That's unheard of. I dare say nowhere else in the world would any responsible public health official have ever given that advice. This disease is so contagious. You would never do that. The standard recommendation for decades has been, if you're exposed to measles and you're not vaccinated, you must be quarantined. You don't get around other people because you might transmit a disease that last year around the world killed 136,000 people. Measles is not a benign, simple little rash. Well, anyhow, that was bad enough. Dr. Ladapo made a recommendation that shocked the medical community and the public health community and the infectious disease community around the world. Now, I have added qualifications in infection control and hospital epidemiology. I can't tell you how outrageous that recommendation was. But the plot thickens. Just the other day, CBS reported that the state of Florida has spread the infection beyond Florida. There's now 3 states where measles has popped up as a result of exposure in Florida. And how did CBS find this out? Well, they did a Freedom of Information Act request, and they got emails from the Department of Health in Florida to the CDC. In those emails, I've read them. Those emails are very clear. The Department of Health in Florida epidemiologist wrote emails to CDC alerting them to the fact that 3 cases, that there were now 3 states that Florida had seeded measles too, and requesting their help. That's really alarming because now we have evidence for intrastate spread. But here's the why the story is so scandalous and so explosive. Those emails were written by the epidemiologist for the department. She reports directly to the Undersecretary for Health, who reports directly to the Surgeon General. This is a little bit speculation on my part, but I think it's pretty safe to say there is no way that the epidemiologist in the Department of Health in Florida, discovering this intrastate spread, didn't raise the red flag all the way up to the Surgeon General. This is so explosive. There's no way that a Department of Health official would sit on this information and kind of keep it quiet and don't tell the boss. The Undersecretary and the Surgeon General in Florida had to be notified of this. They must have known that there was already intrastate spread. And despite that, he still went ahead and made the recommendation that it's okay, you can send your kids to school, it's your choice. That makes his recommendation even more damning. And then, of course, a few weeks later, when no new cases were reported in Florida, which is really pretty surprising given how contagious it is, when the Surgeon General and the governor took a victory lap, patting themselves on the back for leading the nation with their bold recommendation not to inconvenience people with keeping your kids home from school. That's equally outrageous because it's going to take weeks to months before the spread of this settles down. 3 weeks is not enough. So the point of it all is that this is an egregious breach of basic medical ethics. This is an ethics dilemma. As a physician, you are ethically and legally, morally bound to help. And the Hippocratic Oath. You don't hurt people. You do no harm. And by giving this recommendation that it's okay to send your kids to school, directly put Floridians in harm's way, but worse, put people in other states in harm's way. And it was done with knowledge that it was already spreading. I find this to be among the most shocking things I have ever heard, and totally unprofessional for a physician to do this. This should be grounds for a disciplinary action by the state medical board. If I were a governor and I had a Surgeon General who did this, I would fire them immediately. Instead, Dr. DeSantis is championing this as a great decision and a great victory. It's not. Florida has spread measles now in other states, and that will in turn spread even further. We're already off to the worst year, but worse than last year, and it's only early in the year. We could end up with thousands of children and others who are unimmunized coming down with measles. Now, most cases of measles are mild, but about 2 or 3, 4 children out of every 1,000 who get measles will die, and others will be left with significant neurological disability. So this is not a joke. Again, this is a disease that killed over 136,000 people around the world last year. And the responsible authorities in Florida, knowing that it was spreading across state lines, still went ahead and gave bad advice to the public in Florida. That I think that they should be recalled. This is something for lawyers to deal with now, because it's beyond the pale for a physician. You have to set aside politics and do what's right for people. And making a political decision, putting people in harm's way, is morally bankrupt. So that's my content for today. Let's see what people think.
It just doesn't sound good. We're going to bring in our panel, but I'm going to reach out to Dr. Lopato and see if I can get him on the show to see what his thinking is, or did he really say that, or see if he'll respond at all. And if he doesn't respond, then we'll have to let people know that he's not being transparent. Because if he really understands his position, he needs to get and explain his position.
Yeah,
rather than
he did.
Yeah, right. But he needs to explain it to
you.
Us.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't understand.
Yeah.
He's got to explain it to us. He can't get on. A stage somewhere with a bunch of his own supporters and jump up and down and say, hey, this is the way it is. So I want to hear from him. But in the meantime, we're going to hear from our panel. We're bringing Rick Rosner from, he's a member of the Mega Society, 1 out of a million on the IQ test.
This is a repeat of Florida's behavior during COVID. Ladapo is a lunatic and a charlatan and a liar. When he was hired by Florida to be their Surgeon General, he claimed that he had worked in COVID clinics and worked with COVID and was an authority at UCLA, and UCLA said no, he never did that. So he's not an honest guy, and he has crazy beliefs. And Florida played games with their COVID statistics. They didn't necessarily lie about the numbers, but they played games to avoid reporting deaths and cases. And since vaccines have been available, Florida's kind of poo-pooed vaccines and said, yeah, we're an open state. But their death rate from COVID is 220% of California's death rate since vaccines became available. Early on, Florida did great just because they were lucky, and COVID hadn't hit them hard. But later, 57,000 more Floridians died than needlessly because of their higher death rate, because they politicized vaccines and said, yeah, just do what you want, no masks and no vaccines, because they've got an insane Surgeon General there. And you know, when you murder somebody with a knife, they try to catch you and prosecute you. But when you murder tens of thousands of people with bad policy, you never pay the price.
Yeah, and what like I said, what I find really disturbing, because Florida for years had what they call government in the sunshine, which means the government officials are supposed to disclose and be transparent to facts and figures and things that come from the government. And then all of a sudden, we see a non-transparency. Now, when you start seeing non-transparency, especially in government, it starts reminding you of things that were done prior to World War II, certain leaders, and even is done today by leaders in the Soviet Union. For those who've listened to our shows, everybody knows we run a show and have for the last 2 years out of Kyiv, Ukraine, called Ukraine, Russia, China. And we do have people in China and Russia who actually listen to it, but it's kind of interesting. It comes from Kiev. And one problem is that our friend Putin, first thing he did is he captured the media and he became non-transparent. Okay. So as an attorney, I find that to be very disturbing, that Florida governor would capture the media and be non-transparent. However, in interest of fair play, I will reach out to Dr. Lopato, or whatever his name is, and ask him to appear on the show. If he doesn't appear on the show, it's evidence that they are not. They're trying not to.
He's not a forthcoming guy. He's not going to say yes to your invite.
I don't care. He can say no. I mean, I've had no's, I've had yeses. I've had yeses where they show up, then they turn around, they leave. I don't really care, but I'll reach out anyway in the interest of fair play and what they say in law: notice an opportunity to be heard. So he can explain his position. From what I have seen, I don't see his position being explainable at this point in time. I see it to be a real possible cause of action by somebody who actually listened to him. And some of the, again, I'm getting third-party reports. That's the reason I want to hear from the mouth itself, that some people said they're deferring to his advice as to how they're treating measles. So we're not like that here. As a matter of fact, we're very careful. You notice we show at the bottom, the show is for education only. Please consult your physician for your own medical advice. Dr. Lopato is jumping up and basically giving medical advice, and it doesn't seem like it's good advice. So would you say the advice to, if your kid has measles and it's your decision to send them to school would be good advice, Dr. Patmos?
That's outrageously bad advice. From a physician's point of view, let me sort of kind of put that in perspective. That's about as bad as, if a patient were bitten by a rabid dog, you wouldn't ever say to them, don't worry about it. Don't go get rabies treatment. It's okay. No one would do that. If you were exposed to meningococcal meningitis, and now you have a fever with a stiff neck and you've got spots all over the place, no physician would say, don't worry about it. It's just a little rash. Don't go to the emergency room. That's how wrong his advice was. And, for those who don't know, rabies is 100% fatal, and untreated meningococcal meningitis is 99.999% fatal. So that's how flawed his advice was. Measles is so contagious that to say it's okay. And here he did explain his thinking on the Tucker Carlson show. He said, well, 95% vaccination rate is the target, and we're so close. It's like 91. So it's I thought it was a kind of a reasonable thing not to force people to keep their kids, the economic, thing with the shutdowns and all that. We didn't want to do that because it's close enough, it's close. But see, there's a flaw in that. It depends on where you are in Florida. I just heard this the other day, there are pockets of Florida where the vaccination rate is only 60%. For every percentage drop in the rate of vaccination, you increase the likelihood of a spreading that disease. So 91% is pretty low, and it's actually lower than that in many parts of the state. And we have a lot of people coming into the country who are not immunized, which now, interestingly, they're blaming here's these people who are against vaccination now blaming immigrants for the problem because they're not vaccinated. So I don't know which, you can't have it both ways. But in any event, the answer to your question is it's an outrageous recommendation. I just can't. If a resident physician or an intern did this in a training program, oh boy, there would be hell to pay. I can't imagine what my old chiefs would have done to me if I ever said that when I was a resident doctor. I don't think I would have survived.
And it's not just your kid; it's the kids who can't be vaccinated because they've got some underlying condition,
right?
Like they're getting chemo or whatever, and those kids rely on herd immunity to not get infected. Also, I'm looking at a measles vaccination map of the United States from the CDC, and Florida is right up against Georgia, which is one of the least vaccinated states in the country at around 78 or 80%, which is nowhere near enough to stop the spread if it gets loose there.
And it is, and it has. And you're absolutely right. And I want to call out what you said, because you made a very important point. There are children with disabilities out there who can't get vaccinated. Children with diseases like mitochondrial myopathy and other mitochondrial diseases and other bad diseases who can't get immunized. And you're just throwing them away. You're throwing them under the bus with this kind of recommendation. It's so hurtful to those kids and to their parents who are trying to manage children with these disabilities. And they're particularly vulnerable. And you might as well just, throw them under the bus. It's just an awful decision. Florida needs to do something about this situation. The University of Florida should step up. I can't imagine what it must be like inside the Department of Health right now. I imagine the people inside the Department of Health are just scared to death and keeping their mouths shut.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, DeSantis is known for actually terminating people's employment if they don't do what he tells them to do, which he did to one of the district attorneys in actually Hillsborough County, where I'm from. And so the thing is, and from what I understand, he did that to the prior Surgeon General of the state of Florida. In other words, if you don't listen to medicine as Dr. DeSantis, who's not a doctor, unless you call a juris doctor, and they're not really medical doctors, unless you listen to him, then you get terminated. Which also, Dr. Patmos, it has now created, or it's been around for a long time, the politicization of medicine and science, because you now have your medicine and your medical advice given to you by a politician, not by a medical doctor, because the politician has control over the medical doctor. So how many... in law, you can't do that. You can't have a non-lawyer owned law firm, at least in the state of Florida. But what would you think about a non-medical doctor owning a medical firm and instructing the medical doctors on how to practice medicine? What were your thoughts on that, Dee?
Well, I think most states have what's called a Corporate Practice of Medicine Act that precludes ownership and employment of physicians by non-medical entities. Now, there's workarounds, captive PCs and so forth. There's ways around that. But generally speaking, physicians, we have an oath that we take called the Hippocratic Oath. There's also the Oath of Maimonides. And those oaths they're not just historical curiosities. They mean something. And the oath that a physician takes is that I will always act to the best of my ability and to the best of my knowledge to protect patients and to protect patient safety and protect patient privacy and to help the public, to help others. It's a calling. It's like a mission. It's almost like a religious thing. It's a calling to protect others and to care for others who are suffering. That's what we're expected to do. And when you set that aside, you make that secondary to the wishes of your boss, for a political reason, you've really violated a basic core tenet of the philosophy that underlies medical practice for over 2,000 years. Physicians we have a sacrosanct responsibility. There's a physician-patient relationship. We must always act in the best interest of our patients. Now, sometimes it's not an easy thing to decide, what is the best interest. It can be complicated, but not in this case. This is very simple. Your child is exposed to measles. Your child's not vaccinated. They could infect 18 other kids. Keep them home. Keep them home until the danger period is over. That's what you do. Anything other than that is a grievous breach of basic epidemiology and infection control.
There's some good news about Florida, that because of term limits, DeSantis has to leave by the beginning of 2026. So if Florida can make it through the next year and a half, then there might be some good news there. Also, the more the nation got to know DeSantis, the creepier they found him to be. So
yeah, he didn't do too good in the primaries. But the thing is, we still have the systemic problem we have to eliminate. Like the Federal Reserve, who has been on our shows, we've had the Vice President, Doug Tillett, and members of the Federal Reserve from Chicago on our shows before. And the Federal Reserve, like it or not, is an independent body. The president can't fire them. Neither can the Secretary of State. Neither can Congress. It almost takes an act of Congress to remove an officer of the Federal Reserve, hence the independence. But that's not what we have it seems to me, in the head surgeon generals, not just of Florida, but a lot of states, that he can be removed. He serves at the pleasure of the governor. And so even though DeSantis goes, it doesn't necessarily mean we've solved the problem. And that's the problem of independence of the person who serves the Surgeon General office, which we need to address this from a legal standpoint. So that person does not have to be beholden to the governor, because they shouldn't be. They should be independent. And for him to be removed, it should take an act of the whole state legislature, not just the governor, to remove a Surgeon General once they're appointed, just like a Supreme Court justice. But we don't have that system, so this failure can take place over and over again. Rick, I see DeSantis being gone, but then DeSantis 2 steps in and goes, "Hey,
if anybody less crazy than DeSantis comes in, even another Republican who's a little bit more sane, he will dump Ledopa, because Ledopa is so obviously a dangerous lunatic."
Yeah. Well,
I'm kind of curious what Kim thinks. Hey, Kim, you look like you.
I am just so awestruck with everything that's going on. I think I'm angry. Because we are not putting the general welfare of the people first. I think people are misusing their powers for the wrong reasons. And it's just bringing the public at risk that doesn't need to be brought to risk. And I think that it needs to be corrected. And like Nick said, I would love to hear. I mean, my anger I'm a mom, okay? And when you're talking about things like this that could, eventually, make a lot of children sick, it could spread really bad. I mean, measles is the worst. Literally, it is one of the worst. And there's no reason to be doing things this way when we could do it the right way. So I think we need to bring the other person on. I think we need to address this issue with DeSantis if we can get him on. because this is very important, and they are not putting the general welfare of the people first. And that's my opinion. And I thank you for bringing this to our attention, because right now and I'm going to be meeting with some people from Miami up at the UN next week. And I am definitely going to be bringing this up.
Yeah.
One bad thing about people who don't like vaccinations is that movement attracts lunatics from both the left and the right. And the guy who's going to come in third in the presidential election, RFK Jr., is an anti-vax lunatic and extra hypocritical, because this is a guy who hates vax needles, but who abuses testosterone. The guy is always, I don't know if it's HGH or testosterone, but he's a 70-year-old guy with the musculature of a 40-year-old with big swollen pecs, because he's injecting himself with all sorts of crap.
Yeah, but we do have to also address the systemic problem, because one commentator was a state senator from Florida, goes, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to listen to the Surgeon General of the state of Florida. Of course, he's the highest in the land. You see the problem. When you have a major conflict of interest, which we do right now in the great state of Florida, that needs to be rectified, and you have lack of independence, which you do right now in the state of Florida, you need to change the legal system the way it's set up now, where the governor of the state of Florida is actually the one who's rendering your medical advice, not the physician. And people will take advantage of it. They go, well, it was the Surgeon General said it was okay to send my kids to school. If they said it's okay, that means it's okay. And off they go to school, not realizing it wasn't the Surgeon General who said it. It was a puppet of a governor, because the laws are structured in such a way that if he doesn't do what the puppet master says, he can be dismissed. And that needs to change. The Surgeon General needs to be independent, just like our judiciary is. Neither Biden or Trump can go in and fire a Supreme Court justice. And frankly, a lot of the judicial, the people that are judges can't be tampered with by politicians. Here, there's a direct tampering, and there's nothing to stop it. And DeSantis has demonstrated that if he doesn't pull the party line, he'll pull them. And then, of course, the lack of transparency, that just shows it to be even worse. So, yes, we're going to reach out to them, see if they have the courage to actually show up. We've also had the Attorney General from the state of Washington on our shows, which I'd like to listen to Bob Ferguson and see what he has to say about this. Of course, he's not in Florida, but I'd be very curious. We'll have to reach out to Bob again. He's also a chess player. That's how I kind of know some of these people. He was a Washington State chess champion, believe it or not. He's a master. He's a good player. So anyway, we're going to have to figure this one out. But in the meantime, this is what's going on in the state of Florida. I don't know how fast and rapid this is going to spread. And when they suppress the information, it's going to be tougher to find out. I'm glad CBS did a FOIA to get the information out there. We're just going to have to keep up with it, Dr. Thomas.
I just Googled Ladapo, and a year ago he was investigated for fraud for releasing a report with fake findings saying that the COVID vaccine was dangerous to young men. And he fudged the findings to make it seem more dangerous.
Well, we'll have some good questions for him, Rick. I want to hear him explain himself. I want to see what his explanations are for this stuff. And if he doesn't give an explanation, he doesn't show up, then you go, maybe he has something he doesn't want to talk about. Because if he really strongly believes in his positions, he really has done his research homework, and he did his work properly, he'd have no problem showing up and explaining himself.
Well, if he hasn't, then do what Irene did. Send this video to him, because she sent a video to someone and they fixed the problem.
Oh, really?
Because they realize that these shows are getting attention, and so they corrected the problem real quick. So
yeah, that was another attorney general, from what I understand too. And then see, we'll have to. I don't know who the attorney general is of the state of Florida, so I have not kept up with that. I live in North Carolina, but we'll find out. We'll do our investigation and find out. And of course, thank CBS for doing their FOI report, and thank our listeners for Medicine and Science and with Dr. Patmos. And we'll see you next week on this saga. Hopefully, it'll all be contained and go away. We'll have something else to talk about. But if it explodes, Houston, we have a problem. Till then, have a good week. Bye-bye.